What happens when a decorated war hero gets called a monster every single week for 6 months straight? This story will surprise you, and it starts in the most ordinary place you could imagine. A small-town diner in Texas where nobody knew they were witnessing the setup for the most devastating takedown in corporate history. Every Tuesday at exactly 2:15 p.m., the bell above Murphy's Diner would ring, and 34-year-old Samantha Rivers would feel her military training kick in. Not because she was preparing for battle, but because she was preparing for something far more strategic: the systematic destruction of the two men who had just walked through that door. Richard Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Business Solutions, strutted in wearing a suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the worn linoleum floors as he surveyed the humble establishment like a king entering his court. His sidekick, accountant Paul Hoffman, followed close behind, already grinning at what they considered their weekly entertainment. They had no idea they were walking into the most elaborate trap ever set by a former combat trauma specialist who had survived 3 tours in Iraq and had been planning their destruction with military precision. Samantha continued cleaning tables, her scarred hands moving with surgical precision that would have impressed her former commanding officers. The burns covering her arms disappeared under her white uniform sleeves, but her hands told a story these men had never bothered to ask about. Instead, they had spent months creating their own twisted narrative, building an entire fantasy around her appearance that revealed more about their character than hers. "Look who's working today," Richard announced to the entire diner, his voice dripping with manufactured disgust that carried to every corner of the restaurant. "It's the monster herself. Hey Frankenstein, bring us coffee, but try not to spill it with those burnt claws of yours. I don't want to catch whatever disease you're carrying." The other customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, a familiar dance of avoidance and embarrassment. Some looked away, studying their plates with sudden intensity. Others pretended not to hear, engaging in forced conversations about weather and local sports. This was Richard's weekly show, and everyone had learned to ignore it through months of conditioning. Everyone except the quiet man in the back corner booth, who had been watching these encounters with growing recognition and barely contained rage. James Mitchell was a 42-year-old Marine veteran with 2 tours in Afghanistan under his belt and a Purple Heart he never talked about. He recognized something in Samantha that these businessmen completely missed: the unnatural calm of someone who had faced real death and emerged victorious. The way she moved with economic precision, the perfect posture despite their attempts to make her cower, the surgical control of every gesture. This wasn't a broken woman learning to survive in a hostile environment. This was a warrior playing the longest game he had ever witnessed. "You know what I think happened to her?" Paul chimed in, settling into their usual booth with the enthusiasm of a man about to share gossip. "Probably got caught in some ghetto fire trying to cook up something illegal. You know how it is in that community. Always blowing things up they shouldn't be messing with. Maybe she was trying to cook crack and the whole thing exploded in her face like some kind of meth lab disaster." The racist assumptions flowed freely from Paul's mouth as he warmed to his topic, his voice growing louder with each speculation. "Or maybe it was domestic violence. You know how domestic violence is in that community. Her boyfriend probably threw hot grease on her during some fight over drug money or territory. These people are always fighting over something stupid." Richard nodded along, adding his own commentary. "Could have been gang initiation. Maybe they held her down and used cigarettes, or made her stick her hands in acid to prove her loyalty. That's how they do things in those neighborhoods. Pure savagery." Samantha approached their table with 2 steaming cups of coffee, her face betraying nothing but professional courtesy. But if they had been paying attention, really paying attention, they might have noticed the way she memorized every word, every gesture, every detail about their expensive watches, their business cards carelessly left on tables, their phone conversations conducted loudly enough for anyone to overhear. They might have noticed how she positioned herself to catch every whispered conversation, how she timed her service to coincide with their most revealing discussions. What Richard and Paul didn't know was that Samantha had been conducting reconnaissance on them and their business for months with the thoroughness of a military intelligence operation. Her mind had become an information processing machine, cataloging every face, every name, every business detail they carelessly revealed during their weekly visits. She knew about their contracts, their clients, their methods of helping companies eliminate problem employees who didn't fit corporate image standards. She knew their wives' names, their children's schools, their country club memberships, their political donations. What do you think, monster? Richard leaned back in his seat, studying her reaction with the cruel fascination of a child pulling wings off flies. What kind of work gave you those battle scars? Wait, let me guess, nightclub bouncer at some dive bar? Kitchen accident at some greasy fast food joint? Or maybe your boyfriend had serious anger management issues, and you were too stupid to leave before he decided to redecorate your face.
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We are just a small channel trying to grow. And do not forget to comment where you're watching from. Thank you, and back to our video.
Paul laughed, adding his own speculation with increasing viciousness. I bet it was manual labor, probably working at some barbecue joint or dry cleaner. Those people always end up in jobs where they get burned because they can't handle anything that requires real skill or education. Maybe she was cleaning bathrooms with industrial chemicals and spilled them all over herself because she couldn't read the warning labels. Manual labor, Samantha replied quietly, refilling their cups with movements so controlled they seemed almost robotic. Her voice carried no emotion, no reaction to their cruelty, which only frustrated them more. You could say I specialized in manual labor. She paused for just a moment, her eyes meeting Richard's with an intensity that made him shift uncomfortably in his expensive suit. The words that came next were spoken so softly that only the three of them could hear, but they carried the weight of absolute truth. Though I suppose carrying wounded soldiers 3 miles under enemy fire while taking shrapnel might be an interesting way to describe manual labor. What did you say? Richard demanded, leaning forward with sudden alertness, but Samantha had already turned away, leaving him with the distinct feeling that he had missed something crucial. Something that might have saved him if he had been smart enough to listen. In the back corner, James Mitchell set down his coffee cup with hands that trembled slightly from recognition and rage. He had caught every word, and more importantly, he had caught the faded edge of a tattoo peeking out from under Samantha's sleeve when she had reached across the table. 1st Infantry Division. Big red one. He knew that insignia, and he knew exactly what it meant. He knew the kind of person who earned the right to wear it, and he knew what happened to people who underestimated those warriors. The question wasn't whether these men had picked the wrong target. The question was how spectacular their downfall was going to be when this decorated warrior decided it was time to reveal who she really was. And based on the calculating look in her eyes as she walked away, that revelation was coming very soon. 6 months of systematic humiliation was about to end in the most devastating 15 minutes of Richard Blackwood's life, and it started with him making the biggest mistake he could possibly make. He decided to film it and share his cruelty with the world. You know what? Richard announced, pulling out his latest iPhone as Samantha approached with their usual Tuesday lunch order. I want everyone to see this. I want you all to witness the absolute monster who serves our food every week. This is going to be epic content for my social media. Maybe I'll start a whole series about freaks in customer service. Paul laughed, encouraging his boss while pulling out his own phone to capture different angles. Make sure you get a good shot of those hands. Maybe she's got an OnlyFans account for people with deformity fetishes. We could probably get 1 million views just from the shock factor alone. This could go viral and make us famous. What they didn't realize was that Samantha had been waiting for exactly this moment with the patience of a sniper. Her entire 6-month endurance of their abuse had been building toward this single opportunity. Her patience, honed through years of military strategic training and combat experience, was about to pay off in ways that would destroy everything these men had built. Please, keep recording, Samantha said calmly, actually stepping closer to the camera instead of backing away like a normal victim would. I'm quite used to being filmed. Usually it's when I'm receiving medals for saving lives under enemy fire. But this works too. Richard paused, confusion flickering across his face like a glitch in his programming. This wasn't the reaction he expected. The broken, humiliated woman he thought he knew would never encourage documentation of her shame. But his arrogance quickly overrode his confusion, and he doubled down on his cruelty. "I'm Richard Blackwood," he announced to his phone camera, regaining his confidence and speaking loudly enough for the entire diner to hear every word. "CEO of Blackwood Business Solutions, and this is the absolute freak show that serves us coffee every Tuesday. Look at those hands, like something straight out of a horror movie. I mean, seriously, what kind of establishment allows someone this disfigured to handle food? It's probably a health code violation." "Perfect," Samantha replied, her voice carrying a strange note of satisfaction that should have terrified anyone with functioning survival instincts. "Make sure you mention your full name and company clearly. Spell it out if you need to. I'm sure your clients will be very interested to see how their business consultant treats people he considers inferior." The words hung in the air like a challenge, heavy with implications that Richard was too arrogant to understand. His phone was still recording, but something had fundamentally shifted in the diner's atmosphere. Other customers were starting to pay attention, sensing that this Tuesday was different from all the others. The usual background noise of conversations and clinking silverware had died down as people turned to watch. "What's that supposed to mean, freak?" Paul demanded, his voice rising with aggressive confusion. But before Samantha could answer, Richard's phone rang with a call that would change everything. The caller ID read Michael Stevens and Associates, Richard's biggest client, representing nearly 40% of his annual revenue and his most prestigious account. His face went pale as he answered, still recording himself, unaware that he was documenting his own destruction. "Richard, we need to talk immediately," came the voice through the speaker, loud enough for everyone in the diner to hear. "I've received some very disturbing information about discriminatory practices at your company. We're considering terminating our contract effective immediately, and we're consulting with our legal team about potential liability issues." Samantha leaned against their table, her posture relaxed but her eyes sharp as surgical steel. Every movement was calculated, every word chosen for maximum impact. "Funny thing about being invisible for 6 months, Mr. Blackwood. People say the most interesting things when they think nobody important is listening." "What the hell are you talking about?" Richard's voice cracked slightly, his confident facade beginning to crumble like a house of cards in an earthquake. "Oh, I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. See, I've been listening to your conversations for months. Every Tuesday, right here in this booth, you and Paul discuss your business methods quite openly. Should I refresh your memory with some direct quotes from last week's conversation?" She cleared her throat and adopted Richard's arrogant tone with devastating accuracy. "The trick is to create retroactive performance documentation so they can never prove discrimination. The secret is never to put it on paper that it's about race. Just find other reasons that sound legitimate. We charge premium rates because we make the problems disappear permanently, and the companies get exactly the workforce demographics they want." The blood drained from Richard's face as if someone had opened a valve. Those were his exact words from their conversation the previous Tuesday, words he thought had been spoken in private to Paul during their lunch meeting. "You see, gentlemen," Samantha continued, her voice taking on the commanding quality of someone accustomed to giving orders in life or death situations. "Texas is a one-party consent state. That means I only need one person's permission to record a conversation. And since I'm part of every conversation you have in my section, well," she pulled out a small digital recorder from her apron pocket, along with what appeared to be multiple backup devices. The technology was military-grade, designed for covert operations. 6 months of evidence. Every Tuesday. Every discriminatory admission. Every client name. Every dollar amount you've charged companies to help them eliminate employees based on race, gender, age, disability, and sexual orientation. The Department of Labor has been very interested in these recordings. So has the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and the FBI's Civil Rights Division. They've been building cases against your clients based on the evidence I've provided. Paul made a strangled sound, finally understanding the magnitude of what was happening. He looked around desperately, as if searching for an escape route that didn't exist, his face turning green with nausea. But here's my favorite part, Samantha continued, her tactical mind clearly enjoying the systematic destruction she was orchestrating with military precision. Your own video, the one you're still recording right now, has already been live-streamed to my social media accounts. My caption reads, Blackwood Business Solutions CEO humiliates decorated war veteran. It includes photos of me receiving the Bronze Star Medal for saving 12 wounded soldiers under enemy fire during my 3 tours in Iraq, along with commendations from my commanding officers and testimonials from the men whose lives I saved. Richard's phone immediately exploded with notifications. Hundreds, then thousands of them. Comments, shares, reactions, news outlets requesting interviews. His wife calling. His business partners. Clients. The video was spreading faster than wildfire across every social media platform, picked up by veteran advocacy groups and civil rights organizations. Sergeant Samantha Rivers, came a respectful voice from the back of the diner. James Mitchell had finally approached their table, standing at attention with the bearing of a man who understood exactly what he was witnessing. Marine Gunnery Sergeant James Mitchell, retired. It's been an honor watching you conduct this operation, ma'am. Richard stared at the 2 veterans, finally understanding what he had stumbled into. This wasn't a broken waitress he had been tormenting for months. This was a decorated combat veteran who had spent half a year building an airtight case against him using military-grade strategic planning and the patience of a sniper waiting for the perfect shot. The trap had been set with mathematical precision, sprung at the optimal moment, and now there was absolutely nowhere left to run. 3 months later, Richard Blackwood sat in his rusted Honda Civic outside Murphy's Diner, staring at the hero's wall visible through the window. His former Blackwood Business Solutions office building now housed a veterans counseling center, and his picture, the one from Samantha's viral video, had become internet shorthand for corporate arrogance and workplace discrimination. The video had gained over 25 million views across all platforms and had been translated into 12 languages. CNN, Fox News, BBC, and every major network had interviewed Samantha. She had testified before Congress about veteran employment discrimination and workplace harassment, her testimony leading to the Veterans Workplace Protection Act. 3 states had passed new legislation inspired by her case, and she was now the most sought-after speaker on corporate diversity and veterans' rights in the country, commanding fees that exceeded what Richard used to make in a year. Richard's fall had been total and devastating, a masterclass in how quickly a life could be completely destroyed. His business collapsed within 10 days as clients fled en masse, desperate to distance themselves from the toxic association. Major corporations issued public statements denouncing his methods and announcing diversity initiatives. His wife divorced him, taking half of his remaining assets and full custody of their children, who now refused to speak to him. The federal investigation that followed Samantha's evidence had revealed a discrimination scheme involving 12 major corporations, all of whom now faced massive class action lawsuits totaling hundreds of millions of dollars. Paul had lost his accounting license permanently and was working at a convenience store across town, recognized almost daily by people who had seen the viral video. The shame, he told anyone who would listen, was unbearable and unending. He had moved 3 times trying to escape the recognition, but the internet never forgets, and his name had become permanently associated with workplace discrimination. His own family had disowned him after the full scope of his involvement became public. But Samantha's transformation was even more remarkable than their destruction, a phoenix rising from the ashes of their cruelty. Tony Martinez, the diner's owner, had promoted her to assistant manager and chief diversity consultant. The hero's wall featured her military photo prominently, surrounded by dozens of other veteran employees she had helped hire and train. Murphy's Diner had become a pilgrimage site for veterans nationwide, a place where military service was honored and respected above all else. Tour buses regularly stopped by, and the diner had been featured in documentaries about veterans' rights. She had turned down offers from Fortune 500 companies to become their chief diversity officer, preferring to build something meaningful in the small Texas town where her journey to justice had begun. Her speaking fees alone now exceeded Richard's former annual salary, but she donated 60% of it to veteran causes and local community programs. She had established the Rivers Foundation for Veteran Employment, which had placed over 2,000 veterans in meaningful careers. The customers who had once sat silently while she was humiliated now greeted her warmly every day, many of them bringing friends and family to meet the famous veteran they had seen on television. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who used to occupy the corner booth, had become one of her most vocal defenders and closest friends. The diner's atmosphere had completely transformed from a place where cruelty was tolerated to a sanctuary where dignity was paramount and discrimination was met with immediate consequences. James Mitchell had relocated permanently to the town, opening a veteran consulting business that helped former military personnel transition to civilian careers. He and Samantha had become close friends and business partners, bonded by their shared experience and mutual respect. Together, they had created a network that placed hundreds of veterans in meaningful employment across Texas and neighboring states. On this particular day, Richard finally worked up the courage to enter the diner for the first time since his public destruction. He looked nothing like the confident CEO who had strutted through these doors months earlier. His expensive suit had been replaced by discount store clothing that hung loosely on his diminished frame. His arrogant demeanor had been replaced by the desperate humility of a man who had lost everything and everyone he cared about. Samantha approached his table with the same professional courtesy she showed every customer, though several other patrons recognized him and whispered among themselves. She poured his coffee without comment, her scarred hands steady and sure, the same hands he had once mocked now bearing the weight of respect from an entire nation. I wanted to apologize," Richard stammered, his voice barely above a whisper, afraid that speaking too loudly might draw more attention to his presence. "I know I can't undo what I did, but I need you to know that I understand now. I was wrong, completely, utterly wrong. I've lost everything, and I deserve to lose it all. My children won't speak to me. My ex-wife tells people I'm dead. I've lost everything that mattered." Samantha studied him for a moment, her expression neutral but not unkind. The woman who had once endured his weekly torture now held all the power, and they both knew it. She could destroy him further with a single social media post, but her military training had taught her when the battle was truly over. "Mr. Blackwood, what happened between us wasn't a misunderstanding or a moment of poor judgment. It was a revelation of character, yours and mine. You showed me who you truly were when you thought there were no consequences. I simply showed you the same courtesy, with the same lack of mercy you showed me." She refilled his cup with the same precise movements that had once carried wounded soldiers to safety under enemy fire and prepared to walk away. "How?" he asked desperately, his voice cracking with genuine anguish. "How did you plan all of this? How did you stay so calm while I was so cruel to you? How did you know it would work?" Samantha paused, considering whether he deserved an answer. After a moment, she turned back, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded respect in the most dangerous places on earth. "You want to know the real difference between us, Mr. Blackwood? You saw a scarred woman serving coffee and decided she was weak, broken, disposable. You created an entire fantasy about who I was based on your own prejudices and limitations. I saw two men whose arrogance and cruelty would eventually destroy them and simply waited for you to prove me right. The military taught me patience, strategy, and how to turn an enemy's strengths against them." She moved toward another table, then stopped and looked back one final time. "True victory isn't about repaying harm done to you. It's about achieving a level of success your enemies could never imagine, and doing so with a dignity that forces them to confront their own moral mediocrity. Respect shouldn't be something earned through uniforms or medals. It should be automatic, universal, human. You failed that basic test of humanity, and the consequences were inevitable." As she walked away, Richard understood that this was as close to forgiveness as he would ever receive. Samantha Rivers had proven that patience, strategy, and unwavering dignity could defeat hatred and ignorance more completely than any act of revenge. She had turned his weapon, public humiliation, against him with devastating effectiveness. The decorated warrior had won the ultimate victory. She had turned her pain into purpose, her humiliation into honor, and her silence into a voice that would protect countless others from experiencing the cruelty she had endured. The monster they thought they had created had revealed herself to be the hero they never saw coming, and her legacy would outlast their shame by generations. If you enjoyed our story, hit the subscribe button for more inspiring stories and don't forget to like and share.